was the first reason he hung on a tree. To restore the world. And he has given us that same ministry of restoration. So now we beg you, through Moshiach, be ye restored to Yahweh. Now here's the second reason. Watch this. Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. It is written in Devarim 21:23. But he was made a curse, and he hung on the tree. He was cut off. Moshiach Yikared, Daniel 9:26. Moshiach Yikared. Why was Moshiach Yikared? For himself? No, not for himself. For others. What? What others? What others? What others? Not so fast. Watch this. That the bracha of Abraham may come upon the nations through Yeshua HaMoshiach, that we may receive the promise of being Yisrael through the Ruach HaKodesh and our emunah, faith. So the second reason Yeshua hung on the tree is to take the blessings of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the chosen spiritual, physical father of all believers, to make them like their father Abraham, both spiritual and physical Israel, and that Ephraim would come home to Yahweh through this hanging on the tree. Hallelujah. That the blessing of Abraham would come to the nations. Hallelujah. That they would become Israel and cross over and be a Hebrew like he crossed over from Mesopotamia and never to return back. So the first reason he hung on a tree was to restore the world to himself. The second reason he hung on a tree was to bring the blessing and the promise of Abraham to the nations, meaning to bring Ephraim back. You know why you're back? You know why you're keeping Shabbat? You know why you're keeping the Kashrut? You know why you're keeping the Moadim? You know why you're taking off from work this year and coming to all the feasts? You know why? So that Yeshua becoming cursed, hanging on a tree, was so that the blessing of Israel may come upon you. So much so, in all its fullness, that it actually comes upon you and overtakes you. And when it's finished coming upon you and overtaking you, it turns you into Israel. Somebody give him praise today. How to keep kosher, how to keep a kosher home, and how to learn about things that are Jewish. By the time the promise is finished coming upon you and overtaking you, it makes you like Abraham. You have the faith of Abraham, the walk of Abraham, the set apartness of Abraham, the kedusha of Abraham, the righteousness of Abraham, and the promise of Abraham will come to all nations because he hung on the tree. So in his death on the tree, the dignity of tzedakah and righteousness comes to all nations. At the point of his lowest humiliation, the value of that one human life, who was Yahweh come in the flesh, brought deliverance, salvation, and the promise of making all who desired to be Israel, that they would become Israel. Come on, somebody. Let's read it again. That the bracha upon Abraham may come to the nations. Why did he hang? Why did he hang? He hung so that the blessing of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov would come to the Ephraimite nations, or the fullness of the Gentiles. Hallelujah! So that you wouldn't just be a Bible believer, and I just love my little Sunday school. No, you always got a bigger plan than that. So it would make you as much Israel, whether you had the right genealogy or you didn't, whether you had the right race or didn't, whether you had the right pedigree or didn't, well, regardless of your background, whether you were born on the right side or the wrong side of the tracks. He hung on the tree so that the very physical and spiritual blessing of Abraham would come upon you, overtake you, mold you, and shape you. For he that begun this work in you will perform it until the day of Messiah Yeshua. Somebody give him praise in the house of Yahweh. Baruch Hashem. When you get a breath of fresh air and you wake up in the morning and you go home tonight and say, I've been feeling down, I've been feeling downcast, I've been confused, I felt like I've been out of the camp, I felt like people didn't accept me or love me anymore, but oh man, I'm Israel. Ooh, it's a breath of fresh air. Let me drink of that. Let me oxygenize that. Let me take that in one more time. Oh, Yahweh sees me like he sees Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I'm Israel. Let that sink in again, because Yeshua hung on a tree.
Amen.
Not for the reasons Judaism says, for the reasons Yahweh says. The fact that he hung on a tree is inescapable. The reasons he hung on a tree are written in Scripture, not in the Talmud. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. It's getting hot now. Whoa, baby. Whoa, I'm feeling hot. How about you video members? Are you feeling hot? How about you audio members now? You feeling hot? Are you feeling hot in the ruach? Are you feeling fired up? Well, get up out of that chair. Get up out of that sofa. Start dancing. Let your husband think. He already thinks you're nuts. Let him know. Give him a confirmation. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Now I want to share this with you. He hung so that the blessing of Abraham may come upon the nations. And that's what the Miami Beach Israel Revival is all about. It's not about everything being perfect. It's about, whoa, that blessing and promise of Abraham has come upon me. And all it takes is a little education. And all it takes is a little discipleship. And all it takes is a little training. And you'll walk into that revelation. And once you walk into that revelation, you'll never want to walk out and leave that revelation. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. But there is an important allegory in the Talmud that goes like this. Listen to this. The hanging, now what is the whole message here? The dignity of human life, even a dead corpse on a tree. Yahweh said, no. He's cursed. He's dead. He's hanging. Bring dignity, Israel. Bring dignity. Don't do like the pagans do in mock. Tear off his head, pass it around the crowd. Don't do the guillotine routine like they did in ancient France. In the Scarlet Puppet. Remember that play, The Scarlet Puppet? I'm sorry, Pumpernickel, starring Nina. She was in the play. No, man, it's not about parading the viciousness and he was a loser, he was an enemy of the state, he was a tax evader, he was a bee, and we're gonna make an example out of him, and we're gonna pass around his body, and we're gonna do a Mussolini when Mussolini tear him in little parts, and everybody gets a souvenir to take home. No, Israel. The measure of Yahweh's grace and dignity for human life is found to the worst sinner in the worst humiliation at the lowest point of their life. When Yahweh says the one who's hanging on a tree is cursed, he says he's cursed by Yahweh, but man must not curse what Yahweh has called special. And if there is no junk in the world, how much more in the kingdom? There's no junk, there's no losers. There are some who struggle, and there's some who have less struggles, but we're all struggling. We're all struggling to love Yahweh with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we're all studying and trying to love our neighbor as ourselves. And love does not come easy. And we have to learn how to learn. Loving is learning. We all have to learn. If we all were born knowing it, then Yahweh wouldn't have to send his son. People go, oh, I love, just love your brothers and sisters. What do you mean love? There's a million deviations, permutations, and perversions of love. Love your neighbor as yourself. So do I sleep with my neighbor as I sleep with my wife? What do you mean love? I don't understand. So, in other words, loving is a learning process. We learn how to love. We become less judgmental, more forgiving. We let things go easier. We're all learning how to love. Don't tell me you're a loving believer and he's not.
That's right.
Don't tell me you're a loving believer and she's not.
That's right.
Loving is a process.
Amen.
And we all have to learn how to walk in that love, myself included. Believe me. When I say all, I mean all. No one is excluded. You have a coughing problem, brother? No one is excluded. We're all in this learning process.
Amen.
Amen. Even Yeshua. Even though he was the son of Yahweh, what does the book of Hebrews say? He learned obedience. Yeshua, through the things he suffered.
Amen.
Even Yeshua had to learn obedience from the Father. Learn the obedience of loving. Loving through suffering.
Yes. That's what we all doing.
Yeshua said, Father, I don't want to drink this cup. I don't want to drink this cup. I'm suffering. Yahweh said, I'm teaching you about loving the world. You're dying for the world. You've got to learn to love it. You will drink this cup. You will drink this cup. Because in that suffering, you're learning obedience and you're learning how to love. So don't be hard on yourself. For whom Yahweh loveth, he chastens and disciplines and scourges every son and daughter whom he receives. Everyone. Amen. And I am more loving than a lot of folks. And there are a lot of folks that are more loving than me. We are all in this different process. And some of us are in the love boat. Some of us are boarding the love boat. Some of us are gambling on the love boat. Honey, don't let me find you gambling on that love boat. So we're all in different processes and different places in our love boat experience.
Let's go to the love boat.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh. I think we're in the love boat.
Yahweh.
So I've been trying to tell you, this is a love boat. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. But there's an important allegory in the Talmud that goes like this. The hanging of a sinner who commits blasphemy or is engaged in idolatry is comparable to identical twins. Don't miss this now. Is comparable to identical twins. One who became an important minister, servant, let's call him servant, let's call suffering servant, while the other was caught as a bandit and hanged. So we're twins. Write this down. In the Hebraic writings of the understanding of the cursing of everyone who is hung on a tree, a perfect example or allegory of the hanging on a tree in our Torah Parsha are two twins. One is a bandit, and one is a minister, a rabbi, pastor, a kohen, a minister. But they're twins. The bandit was caught being a bandit, and the bandit was hanged. All who saw the bandit said, look, the minister or the servant has been hanged. But it really wasn't the righteous servant that was hanging. But Israel thought that it was the bandit hanging. It was really the servant hanging. But they were identical twins. Get it? So all Israel, this is in the Talmud, talking about the hanging of a person on a tree. In the Talmud it says there's an example of what hanging on a tree is all about. There are two twins. One is a bandit, one is a righteous servant, a minister. But everybody saw the bandit, they go, oh, of course. That's the thief, that's the bandit. Of course, the bandit is being hung. Of course, because the bandit is being cursed. The righteous servant, the righteous rabbi, the righteous tzaddik would never be hung, would never be hanging on a tree, cursed. Israel thought that the one on that tree was the bandit, but little did they know it was the righteous servant. In other words, man, when he sins and transgresses to the point where he becomes deserving of hanging by the courts, was still created in Yahweh's image. Thus it is as if he, the bandit, is seen by Israel as an identical twin of Yahweh, even when the masses mistake the servant, the righteous servant, as a bandit. I'll say that again. The Jewish respect and the Hebraic understanding of the dignity of even a cursed human being hanging on a tree. He should be down by night. He should not leave his body hanging on a tree to protect his basic human dignity, even though he's being humiliated and is a dead corpse. Even though the world sees a bandit. But it's not really the bandit, because the world's confusing the bandit with the righteous servant. The one that's really hanging is the righteous servant. Do you know anybody like this? The world thought he was hanging for his own sins, that he was a thief, a blasphemer. He blasphemed in both cases, using the name and idolatry. But it wasn't really the guilty that was hanging. It was the righteous tzaddik, the righteous servant, the righteous minister that was hanging.
The foundation of the world.
So the Talmud says, in the Talmud it says that when the sins and the transgressions become deserving of hanging, and the bandit hangs before Israel, even the bandit, now don't miss this, must be considered the identical twin of Yahweh, for he was made in the image and likeness of Yahweh. I'll say that again. In the Talmud it says, the dignity of a human being, even at his most vulnerable point and most humiliated point of a dead corpse, must be given honor and respect, because even this bandit, who is the one hanging, not the righteous servant, even this bandit is to be viewed and treated like the woman who was taken captive earlier in our parsha. She was supposed to be comforted, given haven, and married. That's the way we are to treat even a sinner hung on a tree, cursed by Yahweh. Is anyone getting this?
Yes.
So the Christian attitude is, well, once you're dead, you're going to hell, and it's too late. The Hebraic attitude is, no, even in death, even in unrighteousness, even it's a bandit, an unrighteous bandit, bring to him the dignity of creation. Does any of this make sense? Come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Father, Son, and Spirit. Yeshua is made in the image of Yahweh, brought forth in the image of Yahweh, the Adam Kadmon. We are Adam, or man, made in the image of the primordial heavenly Adam, or the Adam Kadmon. So Adam was made in the image of the heavenly Adam Kadmon, or the spiritual primordial Adam, not made in the image of the Father.
That's right. Oh, hallelujah.
So we go back to treating women who are taken in captive when we are in a war for the Hebrew mindset and the Hebrew truths versus the Greco-Roman false belief systems. There are going to be captives, there are going to be people that are taken prisoner, but when we wage war militarily or spiritually, we are to treat the prisoner of war not like the Americans treated those at Abu Ghraib. We are to treat them with respect by giving them comfort, haven, and even marrying them. And if they ever don't find favor in our eye, we are to release them to the goodness of Yahweh and not sell them and make merchandise. And the way we treat our captives, especially women taken captive, that's the way we are to treat even the worst sinners among us. Am I boring you?
That's true. That's true, though.
Do not let the enemy ever lie to you again that grace started at Golgotha. That is a lie from the pit of hell designed to remove you from the eternal rachamim and chesed of Yahweh. If this is Jewish legalism, pardon me, give me more. I didn't have a year for my honeymoon. I didn't have a year. If this is Jewish legalism, please give me more. So that the opposite of legalism is not grace, it's anarchy.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Hallelujah.
Which is why you've got Toronto blessings, followed by Brownsville blessings, followed by Vineyard blessings, where you got people wrapping a microphone cord around a man on the floor who's walking on his hands and knees, barking and cackling like a hen.
That's right.
And the pastor is the one walking him around the congregation on a leash.
That's right.
That's what happens when you reject the Torah.
That's right. Stupidity.
Amen.
Yahweh gives you up to your own stupidity.
That's right.
Amen.
If you ever see me putting a microphone cord around and walking you like you walk a puppy, please report me, please. Call Rabbi Ed or Rabbi Tom and say, Rabbi is flipped. Instead of teaching the people, he's walking them around the congregation on a leash. But what do you expect? They're back barking like dogs, cackling like hens? Well, hey, you don't want Yahweh's grace. That's the Torah. So now you're left to your own devices. You're left to your own understanding.
Amen.
You don't want the, Yahweh said, I've given you this Torah, and the nations that see you following this Torah will acknowledge that there is no nation as wise and as learned and as righteous as this nation, because it's the Torah that makes you wise, learned, and makes you stick out among the nations. You follow Torah, you will stick out among your Christian friends. You'll stick out like a good thumb, not a sore thumb.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
So when you say, oh, a year off is legalism, okay? Yahweh gives you Moadim, weekly Shabbats, no work. You can't be a workaholic if you're an Israelite. Every 7 days you've got to stop your workaholism.
That's right.
Without counseling, without guidance counselors, without psychotherapy, without hypnosis. Every 7 days Yahweh is going to cure you of your workaholic behaviors. You'll do nothing for 1 day every week. Well, but there's no grace in the Torah. But we want to be American. We want to wrap ourselves in the American flag, and when we get our prisoners, we'll let them know we're Americans, and we lead the gold medal count at the Olympic Games, and to prove to you that we're superior, we'll beat your butt to a pope. And then we'll take pictures and send it home.
No, no.
But Israel, no, you don't treat your POWs that way. You comfort them, you give them haven, even if you have to marry them to take them in. And when they mourn, because they're outside of their Abba and Ima's house, you mourn with them. And the way you treat your prisoners when you go to war, not if you go to war, when you go to war, that's how you treat the criminal, the bandit, hung on a tree. Because you don't really know. It could be that that bandit is the twin, and it's not really the bandit, it's the righteous, suffering servant.
Amen.
Let's continue.
Father Yahweh.
Let's continue. In other words, even if it is a bandit, or if we think it's a wicked person being hung for blasphemy or idolatry, even that Israelite who was truly convicted of blasphemy must be viewed as the identical twin of Yahweh, despite his sin, since all humanity is brought forth in Yahweh's image. Hello?
No.
Wrong.
But if we are to treat a bandit with such dignity, if a bandit hanging on a tree, cursed of Yahweh, is to be considered Yahweh's twin because he was made in the image of likeness of Yahweh, how much more Yahweh's express image? Turn with me to Ivrim chapter 1. Is anyone join?
Hallelujah.
Ivrim chapter 1. These notes will be on the internet tomorrow morning. Ivrim chapter 1. Portuguese. In Portuguese. Ivrim chapter 1. Give me a page, please. 749. 1149. I had one lady said to me, when will the restoration scriptures that come out in Chinese? I said, when you donate $50,000, sweetheart. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. What page?
Yahweh.
11. Oh, I was on 1049. 1149. Ivrim 1:1. And we'll start winding down. Elohim, who at various times, in different ways, spoke in times past to the Avot of Israel by the Nevi'im, has in these Yamim Acharonim spoken to us by his Son, who is appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made all the worlds. Verse 3. Tiferet, beauty, and the express, listen, and the exact or the express image of his person. Who is Yeshua? The exact replica, the express image of the person of the Father.
He is Yahweh. Hallelujah.
He is the express image of the Father.
Hallelujah.
Now,
Hallelujah.
if that bandit was to be viewed as Yahweh's twin, who was a blasphemer and an idolatrous bandit. And he was to be viewed and treated as Yahweh's express image. How much more Yeshua, who hung on a tree, who is the express image of Yahweh?
Yes, Yahweh.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Is it possible that Jewish Israel has been looking at a man that has been classified as a bandit, hanging on a tree, receiving the dignity of one who is to even receive basic human dignity, and all this time it's been this righteous servant who is hung on the tree?
Hallelujah.
And this allegory appears in the Talmud, right in the Talmud. The allegory that even a bandit must be viewed as Yahweh's twin, because in many cases the bandit is not the bandit, it's the righteous twin who's hanging in place of the bandit. This is in the Jewish Talmud. They admit that you've got to treat everyone hanging on the tree with basic human dignity, because what looks like a bandit may be Yahweh's righteous minister, i.e. suffering servant. And sometimes when it looks like a bandit, it really could be a righteous man hanging who is tried unjustly. And therefore, because it could be the righteous man hanging rather than the bandit, because you can't tell them apart, you've got to treat both of them with great decency and respect, because sometimes what looks like the bandit is actually the righteous servant dying instead. And that's what the Besorah is all about. That's what it's all about.
Love.
And this is right in the Talmud, brothers and sisters.
Love.
Right in the Talmud.